From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. It seems these days that if you're ever in the mood for a lively debate, all you have to do is mention two letters, AI. Artificial intelligence is dominating headlines, driving stock market prices, infiltrating the internet, and getting booed at college commencement addresses. Here on Blue Sky, we like to talk to people making the most of and seeing the best in the challenges before us. And on this episode, we found just that person for the subject of AI. For over 15 years, Dr. Marc Bloomfield has been applying artificial intelligence to solve complex business challenges, long before ChatGPT made it mainstream. As a fellow at Cambridge Judge Business School, Marc works closely with senior executives to inform the implementation of AI across their organizations. His expert insights are trusted by major global companies, including Vodafone, Unilever, and Pfizer. Operating at the rare intersection of academia, business, and technology, Marc brings a perspective few can match. I'm very pleased to have him on the show, and I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Dr. Marc Bloomfield as much as I did. Dr. Marc Bloomfield, welcome to the Blue Sky podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Delighted to be here.
It's great to have you on. Just about every conversation I have on this podcast at some point gets to AI. We'll get to it earlier than usual on this one because you are an AI expert, but that's not how your career started out. You have a career that seems to be defined by reinvention and pivots and that sort of thing. And you can start wherever you want, but one of the things I was particularly interested in, you aspired to become a pilot when you were younger. So can you just sort of talk us through your career path?
Absolutely. And you can probably see a picture just above me as well that has access of me learning to become a pilot when I was 16. Yeah, so I was always fascinated by aviation when I was a child, started flying when I was 16 and found out I was colorblind. And actually at 16, it was more devastating than I probably anticipated because that was always my intended career. And I almost described that as my first major transition in life, shaking off the fact that I couldn't do this. But then it seemed to come back in my career. I did a PhD with Airbus on designing wings and aerospace metaphors creep into my parlor. So I'm sorry if they come up today. But I've always been deeply fascinated by aviation. And even my first job after my PhD was in travel. And for me, there is always something quite unique about flying, a very liberating feeling when you have it gives you perspective. And also I remember the very first flight lesson I had, Bill, the instructor said to me, "Marc, you're doing a very good unintentional spiral descent."
Oh, gosh.
And it was one of the nicest ways of saying you're screwing up that I've ever heard.
Wow. Yeah, and it's funny with aviation, when I talk to people about all these things in our world that we take for granted, and I think at our peril because it doesn't keep us hopeful and optimistic, air travel, we take it so for granted. And the safety of air travel, because you read about and you hear about the crashes and that sort of thing, it's so much safer than, walking across the street or certainly getting in a car. It's just the advancement you've seen since you were 16 even is incredible.
That's right. My grandma used to say it's the safest thing on earth. But what hasn't changed, sadly, is the airport customer experience. I still think we're waiting for improvements.
That's another episode.
Absolutely. But I'm optimistic about the future of airports even.
There you go. And you were also serious about golf.
Yeah.
And thought about even turning professional in golf.
Yeah. I started thinking I was good, and then you start meeting other people who are better, and that quickly reframes. Yeah, so golf, like flying, is one of the activities I can do where I feel completely free, where I feel completely removed from the world and almost very present in the moment. And you probably see golf clubs behind me. They're all pervasive everywhere I go for me. I love golf. I love the challenge because it's really you versus nature. and almost it's you competing against yourself. And I think golf, probably more than any other sport, teaches you of humility, of externalities, that there are things you can't control and that you just have to adapt. And I think flying offers a similar parallel. So I sometimes reflect and think maybe this is almost the common denominator in my life. It's just navigating what we can't control.
Fascinating. Well, in terms of things that feel out of control to some in our listening audience, we'll turn to your current expertise. And in AI years, you've been doing this for about 100. You're 15 years in AI. And when people hear AI, a lot of people think it sort of bursts on the scene with ChatGPT. It's actually different forms of AI have been around for 70 plus years. Can you sort of talk about what AI started out as, how it's evolved, and then what it's looked like in your last 15 years? It's a big question, but sort of a quick history of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, without breaking into the History Channel, I'll try. I mean, so the ambitions of artificial intelligence started kind of during World War II, post-World War II, in the UK from an Alan Turing perspective. And I think what was happening is that the mathematics was ahead of what was actually technically possible. So there was almost this duality of what computers could do versus what we wanted them to do. And almost fast forwarding 20, 30 years in terms of the experimentation, the walls, people talk about the AI winters where investment dried up. Then really coming out of the 2000s, we saw this huge explosion, both in terms of research. There's some seminal papers that started to come through. And then we saw the birth of generative AI. And I mean, I think if I include my PhD, my time in AI has almost been 20 years, and I fell into it by accident. So my PhD was with Airbus, but it was really on optimizing wing structures. And I fell into machine learning, where the goal of machine learning is to look at predict outcomes based upon data and statistical patterns, and then optimization, which is what you do with it and how you take action. And so the arc that we've seen on AI, I think, is we've been able to have systems that can respond to us in very restrictive, controlled ways. But we're now seeing systems that not only can feel like they can have a conversation with us, but now with agentic AI, we have AI that can act. And I'd say almost one of the biggest shifts that we've seen is AI as a source of recommendation, where the human takes the action, to now AI agents that can act on our behalf. And this is a fundamental shift that probably hasn't existed with the level of intelligence that we now have.
So you rattled off a couple of them. So there's different types of AI today. There's predictive. I think you've narrowed it down really to 3, if I'm right: predictive AI, generative AI, and then physical AI. Physical AI to me is the easiest one to explain: robotics, sensors, that sort of things. Could you talk us through the difference between predictive AI and generative AI?
Sure. So predictive AI. So think of this like a Netflix recommendation. So Netflix has lots of data about what you watch, and they make a recommendation based upon those patterns, often known as NBA, next best action. So Bill has watched this, therefore, Bill, I recommend you do that. Equally, we see this across YouTube and TikTok. But equally, this is machine learning. When I first finished my PhD, I was in travel. And I would say if you've been on vacation in the past 20 years, machine learning probably has had a role in actually defining the price that you pay. So generative AI is then our ability to create something new, like create new content. This could be creating a document, a video, an email, even a song. And so for me, generative AI is the big leap because we've democratized AI for the first time. So previously, it was for the nerds in the corner, like us, but now suddenly everyone can do it. And so I remember Mark Zuckerberg would always say on Facebook, his ethos was move fast and break things. And Reid Hoffman said last year, we're now in the world of move fast and make things. So this ability to make and create has been there. There is a third part, which is then agentic, which I think is probably the third part. Agentic AI is then where it has the ability to determine its path of action and act on your behalf. So, for example, it might be an AI agent that is scanning your usage patterns and goes, Bill, I don't think you should pay for this subscription anymore, and takes action on your behalf. And then we've got physical, which is, as you say, robotics, sensors, and things like this.
When he was younger, Marc Bloomfield wanted to be a pilot, but color blindness held him back. He also thought he might make a living playing golf, but in this case, he realized there were simply too many others better at the game than he. Many listeners can relate to that. But fortunately for us, he's moved into the field of technology and is now one of the great thinkers and advisors on the subject of artificial intelligence. One of the many things I appreciate about Marc is that while he's a leading expert in AI, he's also adept at explaining how newbies like me might start using it and understanding it. For more on that, let's get back to our conversation. I tend to be somewhat of a technophile, nowhere near expert, but I generally embrace new technologies, and I have found in small ways AI making my life better, easier, more efficient. A lot of people out there have a lot of anxiety about it, as you know. Help us think through. You are, I think it's fair to say, an AI optimist. You're embracing it. You're speaking on the subject. You're advising on the subject. What can you tell a nervous listener about AI, what not to be nervous about, and then also maybe how they can put it to good use in their own life?
So I think there's parallels with a nervous flyer. And people who know about flight travel. Now, I want to separate this from the press and the Jobmageddon narrative that currently exists. But this anxiety of what AI is, well, actually, we need to learn about it. So if someone was scared of flying therapy actually starts with education of how planes work, how they fly, the role of the pilot. And I think one of the things I would love to see vendors do in the AI space is almost demystify actually how these tools work. Because we need more trust in these systems if we're going to lean into it. So can it help us understand what it's doing? How's it working? The steps it's taking to build this confidence. But to build this trust and reduce this anxiety, I would say get started with AI, in something you're an expert in, because you can judge how good it is. That's the first advice. The second advice is to pick something very, very small. So the scope of what it can do is quite tight and restrictive. So therefore it feels almost like a controlled experiment in the lab. And so by doing this and then asking the next incremental question, almost with a childlike curiosity, you start to build up your own literacy about what it can do, what its limits, and ultimately how it works. And it almost goes back to your history question before, because historically AI sat in the deterministic space where for every input it gave repeatable answers. But AI now is probabilistic in the sense of what you put in, you might get slightly different answers each time, as a human is. But I think to reduce the anxiety, start slow, start simple, and do it in something where you can challenge and understand.
It's great advice. It was I think it was 2 Father's Days ago when ChatGPT was just introduced, and I thought I'd play around with it. So I asked it some questions about my dad and his career, and so I knew the answers. And it was making factual errors that remind me of people, there's the expression, often wrong, but always certain. It like spit out this answer so quickly, and it was all very credible, but it just was wrong. And so I fed some back. And in the time since then, I'm more skeptical, but I do think it's gotten better. And I'm now a Claude user. And also, though, I think one thing I've learned as I've tiptoed into this is you also become better at asking the question. So, for example, if you ask Claude to give you feedback on a page of writing that you've done, it seems that the business model, it might be rewarding flattery and things like that. So instead of, what do you think of this paragraph? Oh, it's great. Change this. Or you say, tell me 5 things that are really bad about this. Or what's another way, right? You sort of get better at that as you go. Is that fair?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the default model is sycophantic because it wants you to use it more. And don't get me wrong, Bill, we all enjoy a little tickle of our egos once in a while.
It's not bad, right?
But when the chat starts, Marc, this is the best idea you've ever had, or this changes everything, you begin to question what these things are doing. Yeah. So when I left my last corporate role, which was nearly 4 years ago, one of the first tools I ever built was an AI agent, which I would talk to, and its only job was to disagree with everything I say. Now, the first minute sometimes can be quite infuriating, but you realize you're thinking better. You're being challenged, almost like going to debate squad. And so for me, what that started to inform was how might I use AI in ways that makes me more human and not less? Because I don't want to fall into the trap of just outsourcing and delegating all my work, because what technically is known as metacognitive laziness, the other phraseology is AI obesity, We don't want to get fat on this process. So we need to have intentional judgment about where we want to use AI and perhaps where we don't want to.
Okay, I want to pause on that and dig a little bit deeper. So this one of the fears people have is we're going to sort of lose our humanity as we sort of hand things over to AI. And you just said very articulately, there's a way to avoid doing that. Let's talk some more about that. Coach someone on how they can move slowly and then quickly into AI and still maintain their sort of autonomy, their humanity, and continue to elevate themselves and not just become, I love AI obese. I'd never heard that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's not my term. It's Pascal Bonnet's term, but it's a very good one and very visceral term. So for me, if we kind of rewind and say, imagine you're getting started, you're practicing on things you're an expert in. It's almost like doing reps at the gym. You're starting to build the muscle. The thing that I do once a week is I have a long walk by myself, and I call this my AI amnesty. And what I ask myself is, how have I been using AI in the past week? And is this the right and good thing to do for what I want to achieve? So one of the things I never do, I never write my LinkedIn post with AI because I think that challenges my authenticity. Plus, AI can never understand my dad jokes and just how I write. So neither can my kids. That's a different point. But equally, that AI amnesty, which is an introspection, reflection, which is saying, how I've been using AI in the last week. And if you sit back and you realize you delegated everything to it, that might be right for you, but I would probably say it isn't. And so someone asked me at a keynote recently, Bill, what's the most useful or important skill in AI right now? And I said, building relationships. And someone said, well, that's not an AI skill. I said, it is, because how do you think we function in the world? How do you think we influence the work that happens in the workplace? So I want to use AI in a way that can alleviate some of my repetitive, boring tasks. But the part of my job that's more relational and judgment, I want to preserve that. And so by getting rid of things, for example, like tax returns with AI, I have more time to meet with people, which shapes and informs my opinion of AI and also sharpens my thinking.
I love that last part because I interviewed Sal Khan of Khan Academy, who's doing remarkable things with Conmigo and AI in education. In my opinion, I read his book. It was fantastic. And he talked about teachers and, why do you go into teaching? No one's going to say, I went into teaching to do lesson plans, right? Or to grade a pile of papers. And if AI can be used to take those chores off your plate, you can elevate to do well and use more of your time to do those things that you got into teaching for in the first place, working with kids, teaching them, making them better young people. Is that a good example?
Absolutely. I mean, I have so many debates with people who say, AI is going to take all our jobs. Aren't you just supporting this? And I always say to them, but what's a job? But what really is a job? If a job is a list of tasks, then perhaps. But a job is more than that. A job is judgment. A job is relational. It covers part of your identity. And so if I think about a teacher, and my wife was a teacher before we had children, there's so much more to it than lesson plans. And actually seeing the growth in the child, being able to give a degree of personal support. But equally, given the social challenges that many kids have today, you're playing a pastoral role in the classroom. And if that time gets taken up by the drudgery of lesson plans or photocopying, all these things, then they're not giving to the child what they want to give to the child.
Exactly. As someone who can get a little skittish on a bumpy airplane ride, I appreciated Marc's idea of treating AI anxiety like a fear of flying. I also like his advice to simply get started with artificial intelligence on something small and that you know about. That's worked well for me, and I continue to be impressed by the many ways AI tools can truly be helpful. Best of all, I love his notion of using AI to make us more human, not less. This is a great mantra to keep in mind as we all move forward into this brave new world. Getting back to Marc, here he'll talk some more about AI and its potential impact on the labor market. So you mentioned, I think you used the term Jobmageddon. That might be, especially I think, well, maybe for everybody, but I think young people getting out of college looking for work, AI as a job eliminator. And I heard someone say that this has been exaggerated. This impact has been exaggerated, even perhaps by the AI companies themselves, as they try to promote this as this life-changing, life-altering technology. What would you say to someone who's listening right now who is terrified of AI, if for no other reason than they think it's going to eliminate jobs in general and maybe their own in particular?
So allow me to start at the philosophical level and I'll come into the practical level. At the philosophical level, one of my favorite quotes in futures is a trend until it bends. And so right now we have a feel that this AI trend is just going to extrapolate and go on forever. But there is signs of a techlash, this societal pushback on AI, and partly exasperated by the difficulties of the graduate market to find a role. And so I think organizations are realizing, and I've had this experience deploying machine learning models in the past, AI requires as much oversight and governance as it takes in build and creation. So there is absolutely a new wave of jobs and skills that are going to be required. Whether universities, schools, or society is upskilling for those skills that are going to be needed is probably a whole nother podcast. But I think with the graduates, it's about really asking yourselves what type of skills are going to be required. And I don't mean just over-investing all your time in prompting, but really around governance, oversight, and arguably the softer skills. And for some organizations who I advise, I mean, most of my time is advising boards around the world on their own AI transformation, is to say at some point, could it be plausible that the AI becomes the commodity? And if AI becomes the commodity, what's the source of differentiation? You. So right now, I would focus them on, yes, having the understanding, the literacy from an AI perspective and being aware of what AI is moving, because let's face it, it's the worst AI we're ever going to have again, is today's. But try and invest in the social skills, those ability to have relationships, to have conversations, both challenging and practical, but be aware that AI, to operate successfully at scale, requires governance and oversight in a positive way. And without sounding like a cynic, I sometimes think it's in the interest of vendors to lose people, because if they're not demonstrating the efficiency impact of their own products on their own business, they may appear slightly hypocritical. Now, I know the detail, or the devil is in the detail on that one, but I'm also skeptical as a person that efficiency is the only play when it comes to AI. There's a lot more value that AI can bring.
Great answer. And you mentioned governance, and that's another thing that concerns people. And I have some concerns as well in terms of governance being, as these things develop, often the sort of quote unquote governance is in the hands of the people making these technologies, which I think is fraught with conflict and potential peril. And meanwhile, whether it's the government sector or other parts of society who are trying to govern and frankly don't understand it well enough. What's your view on that? What's your hope for that as this genie flies out of this bottle? How is it well governed to make the most of it and do the least harm to us?
So this is something I'm extremely optimistic about. Without almost quoting or stating something from my childhood, do you remember Ronald Reagan's quote, "Trust but verify"? I think this is almost the direction of travel, because I think people, to use these tools, we have to trust. And right now there is a huge trust deficit for many, many reasons. And so how do we build trust? Well, I think trust is going to come through verification and transparency. But to make it a bit more topical, almost coming back to your school teacher example, you may remember at high school, Bill, when you were learning mathematics, the teacher might say, "Bill, it's not good enough to give me your answer. You have to show me how you got there.
Show your work."
Yeah, something I got scolded for most of my schooling career. And I think for these AI platforms to really scale and succeed, both financially and socially, the burden of proof is on them to build the trust and that level of expansion. So I think governance to work has to be embedded at the root of the platform to build trust for individuals to use it. Now, for organizations, this is where the responsible AI frameworks come in, where we start asking questions like, is our data secure? Is it private? Are we using it in ethical ways? Is the use inclusive? But to keep the conversation simple for your listeners, I would really focus on how are vendors, companies, and society helping foster and build trust such that these systems and toolings and technologies can be used in a way that benefits society.
Fascinating. And I think too, one of the challenges and one of the things I encourage people to stay optimistic about with this is there's so many uses of AI that aren't directly from the consumer. A lot of people think about, oh, should I use Claude or ChatGPT? And that's sort of AI. The things I hear and read about that are going on in medicine, for example, that benefits from AI is staggering. Or I was talking to folks at the Motley Fool, an investment advice organization, and downloading every annual report that's ever been written and every trend or weather forecasting, all these things that the end product will impact us, but we don't see what's going on. And I think that for a lot of people is an untold story about AI right now and its potential going forward. Is that accurate, do you think?
I agree completely. And almost kind of tying the whole thread of the conversation together, when you're learning to fly, you're taught to be very good at horizon scanning, to observe the horizon, what's coming towards you. And I think one of the benefits that the AI tools give us is deep research, whether that's Claude, Gemini. And so what I would always encourage people to do is to look up and out. Try and be inspired by a story or application of AI outside of your domain and knowledge base to really see the application. So, for example, in China, you may have seen videos of Instagram of this, the robotics that you can put around your hip and your knees and it starts walking you. And this can feel almost like consumer technology. But if I think about the UK, there are many people waiting for hip and knee replacements. And so this technology is profound, but we have to allow ourselves the imagination to see the application. But coming back to the horizon scanning point, it's almost my other favorite quote in futures, is that the future really is here. It's not just evenly distributed. And so by using deep research to look up and out and saying, can we reimagine a world that we live in where this capability benefits societies in profound ways? I think, yes, we can.
Yeah, great point. Because I also think, when I talked about who's going to govern AI and we think of these sort of overlords who are these multi-billionaires running these companies, I think it's helpful for us also to think about how these are going to lift people who have the most challenges in our society. And I'll go back to Sal Khan. He talked about, I can speak for the United States. There's a real premium on having tutors for your college prep tests and who gets those? The people who can afford it. The wealthier kids have these advantages. They can pay for the tutor. He's telling these stories about these AI tutor opportunities that can help their kids with their homework and SAT prep. He sees it as potentially a great leveler. And you just described it, something that might help with your mobility when you need surgery or people who are paralyzed, these things that could happen that will help lift everybody, and particularly people who are struggling the most. To me, that's a huge source of optimism.
Oh, massively. But there's also quite different paradigms of AI. I mean, if I think about the West, it's mostly these frontier models owned by multi-billion pound dollar organizations. But you see the Chinese model, which is predominantly open source models. And so even if I think about something like the Phraseology large language model, LLM, it actually contains three assumptions. Like, is the future large? Is the future language? And is the future a model? And so therefore, if I look about what society needs, and I think our jobs as citizens and leaders is to anticipate the needs of those now and in the future, can we reimagine futures and can we use AI to help us engineer and deliver those futures? That is something that I'm optimistic about, because I don't think the future is just from a very few small amounts of tech companies selling software. I think we're going to see AI come at us from so many novel angles and applications that we might look back in 5 years and go, Bill, do you remember we had those data centers? What was that? What was that all about? And so I think that the pace is changing so fast that we just have to keep reminding ourselves, what are the assumptions that the current paradigm is based on, and how are those assumptions being challenged?
You, I think, have used the expression, and you may have coined it, the uncertainty advantage. Can we talk about that? Because that's, again, the things that give people a pit in the stomach. It's just this, it feels like this is coming on so fast. We're not sure where it's going. How do you flip that into uncertainty being an advantage?
So I'll talk about from a piloting angle, first of all, and I'll connect it back. So for me, I love turbulence, both as a passenger and as a pilot.
You wait a second. I got to stop you right there. You love turbulence as a passenger.
Yeah.
Okay, help me with that, because I'm one of those nervous flyers.
Yeah. So for me, something's happening, right? So when you're flying, you're effectively suspended in a fluid. So for me, when I'm going through turbulence, I'm going, right, now the pilot's going to have to really do and implement what he's been trained or she's been trained and learned to do. And so because when you're flying through turbulence, you have to respond.
Yes.
It's not a passive activity. And so when you learn to fly through turbulence, you're taught, I think, 4 key components. I think the first is that be good at horizon scanning, anticipating what's coming up, playing back to your old well, Bill, understand the weather you're flying into. I think the second part is experiment with your route and altitude. And so that's a massive call to action, because turbulence forces us to say, we need to try something different. Relying on what we did previously might not be sufficient. The third component is that pilots spend lots of time in the simulator to prepare for different scenarios. I believe AI and generative AI's biggest value is to allow us to simulate our decisions and actions before we take them, not the efficiency play. And the last is pilots. They're kind of competitors on the ground, but collaborators in the sky. So who are you learning from? And so when I think about that uncertainty that turbulence introduces, it makes me go, right, I clearly need to look up and out, so I'm going to learn. I need to experiment, so I'm going to learn. I need to simulate, so I can learn. And I need to collaborate, so I can learn. So for me, the learning is the emergent advantage that comes from the uncertainty.
Marc Bloomfield doesn't deny that AI will have an impact on the job market, but he believes that as past technologies have, this one will eliminate some jobs, but also create new ones. AI oversight, for example, is one area where he anticipates growth. And I loved what he said about AI eventually becoming a commodity, making people the more special component of any organization. With that in mind, he encourages young people to work on some of their most uniquely human abilities, like communication and social skills. And while I don't share Marc's love of turbulence, his idea that it's great because it forces us to focus and try something different is a great mindset to take when confronted with any of life's inevitable challenges. Now, to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Dr. Marc Bloomfield. You mentioned earlier that you built an agent to disagree with you or to push back.
Yes.
So that's something
It's called my kids, by the way.
Yeah, right. So I had agents running around my house for several years. So that's something I haven't done, and I hear about people doing it or coding and that sort of thing. Can you walk us through when you build an agent, what is that all about? And as you talk about getting into this slowly, is that something that people can experiment with? And if so, how?
Absolutely. So without making the AI, I'm recommending vendors, and Bill, neither you and I are on commission for this. One of my favorite platforms is 11 Labs. So 11 Labs is a great platform for building voice agents. 11 Labs does many other great things, and I'll be doing them a disservice by saying voice agents. But the great thing is they have a template, so you can sign up for free, and it walks you through the components. So if I'm building a voice agent, the first thing we have to have is a kind of a system prompt. Think of this as the personality of our agent. And I know for some listeners that might be philosophically jarring because AI doesn't have personality, but humor me for 2 minutes. So then we have to say, right, okay, well, that's the personality. It's got to be powered by a large language model. You just pick which one you want it to be powered by, and then you get to pick the voice. Now, as someone who worked in the radio industry for 10 years, I'm fascinated by the emotional responses of voice. And so, but equally, you can clone your own voice, Bill, and it is the strangest thing to have a conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I bet.
What do you think of this idea, Marc?
Yeah.
Well, Marc, that's a wonderful idea.
Boy. Yeah.
Psychosis, I think that's called.
Yes.
And then so you then have the building blocks of a system prompt powered by a model and a voice. And you can give the agent more context about who you are, but just get started with the absolute basics. And if you ever said, well, Marc, a system prompt, how do I do this? Well, one of the biggest hacks in generative AI is that if you don't know the prompt to write, go to your favorite chatbot and ask it to create the prompt for you. So type into Claude or ChatGPT, create a prompt for an 11 Labs agent that is going to be a non-executive director for me to challenge me. And then you've got the basis of a prompt that can form it. And so this is one of the beautiful things about AI. For every obstacle we have, reverse the burden and ask it to help you overcome that. And that's the building blocks you have just to get started.
Okay, so a voice agent. So I build one of these. I'm trying to picture this. So I wake up in the morning, I say, okay, I've got this interview with Dr. Bloomfield today, and I'm a little intimidated because he's super smart. He's got a British accent that makes him sound even smarter.
Or a Bond villain.
And I want to ask him, I mean, is that, so I literally say it out loud to this agent and then...
Yeah, so you can publish it in different ways. Most often not, it's just the URL. So for example, I have the link, the URL for my voice agent saved as WhatsApp. So I basically do like a WhatsApp call to my agent. And now there's more technical points that your listeners are very welcome to get in touch with me with in terms of how you make sure it has memory of previous conversations, etc. But the first basic is build an agent because the coffee will percolate, figuratively. And oddly and paradoxically, Bill, the first time you talk to a voice agent, you might be the one that sounds a wee bit robotic.
Yeah, right.
But
yeah, listen to people talk to, hey, Alexa.
Yeah, exactly. But you build a fluency for these things. But I always position AI as a contact sport. And the more you get to build and try, the more you learn about what these things can do. But 11 labs have their own how-to guides to how to get started. But even ChatGPT, if you have a ChatGPT license, switch on voice mode, or the Claude app on your cell phone, switch on voice mode. And about 95% probably of my work with generative AI is in voice, because when you talk to AI, you tend to give a lot more context than when you type, and AI thrives off context.
Yeah, and I want to talk because you have younger children than mine. I often advised our kids, they'd say, yeah, I talked to so-and-so, I talked to this person, and I said, did you talk or did you text? And 99 times out of 100, it's text. And that's fine, and it's efficient. But you know where I'm going. I mean, there's a tone in your voice. There's now I guess emojis have filled some of that gap. So they know I'm kidding, so I put on a wink or whatever. But I hadn't thought about it in terms of AI. So you're saying that there's more context, there's more nuance when you speak with AI than when you type. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, my hypothesis here is that I think when we type, we tend to be computationally efficient or lazy. We want to use the minimum amount of words possible to give us the best answer in AI. I mean, this is known as prompt and hope. And I think prompt and hope might be coming to an end. But when you switch on voice mode and you go, right, this is what I want you to do. You start to engage in a conversation where you offer more of your thinking. Now, it might require a slightly higher upfront investment from you in terms of the content, but the total time to get to an answer that you're happy with, in my opinion, massively reduces.
And I assume there's sort of a text trail of that. If you said, oh gosh, I want to remember what they said, it's simple.
It always converts. Yeah. So you always have that as well.
Okay. So let's talk about raising young people in this brave new world. Because on the one hand, well, in one sphere, you have the pushback on phones in schools and pretty well documented harms that social media can do and that sort of thing. Then simultaneously, you have this AI coming up. And I think as parents, there can be different impulses. It could be protect my kids at all costs, shield them, keep them away. Or there can be, they got to dive into the deep end and become AI natives and that sort of thing. I don't know how old your kids are, how you think about it. But if someone's listening and they still have younger kids in their household that they're raising, how can they think about AI in parenting?
So my kids are 8 and 11. The way I tend to think about AI with them is that water always finds a way. So train them to become a plumber. And so because of that, it's going to creep into their lives. So I'd much rather me control, support their learning. So both my kids actively use AI under my supervision. The old machine learning joke, this is supervised learning. And so for me, it's fascinating to see how they use it. So my 8-year-old son, who's a budding entrepreneur, I've seen a prompt in ChatGPT where he said, help me to make millions by the age of 10. But my favorite prompt actually is from my daughter, who says, you are my lawyer. Argue that iPad screen time limits violates my human rights.
Come on. You're 11 years old.
Yeah, I know. And I said to my wife, darling, I think we've lost this one.
Created a monster.
Yeah. So yeah, but I'd rather build the literacy with them, because what's interesting, they have almost a zero tolerance for the sycophantic output that sometimes they're like, oh, come on. And equally, when it starts to drift away from the conversation, I mean, I've seen responses from my son that says, come on, you're wasting my time now. As an 8-year-old, clearly he has places to go. But I find kids have a very different emotional response. Now, clearly, sample size of 2, so I don't want to over extrapolate this. But I think getting them to understand it quite early on, I think, is important. Equally, I've seen examples at my kid's school where the teacher has used ChatGPT in a mathematics lesson, and for at the time he was in like 3rd grade, and you think, well, 4th grade, and you think, well, what is this showing them? Actually, this is evidencing to them that if you don't know the answer, you default to this, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, because we don't want to lose the challenge and the cognitive process we go through when we're learning, rather than just so I get them to say this, I want to use AI, but why do you want to use it? And so what I'm trying to create with them is an intentional muscle that they get to decide to deploy when, and I think that will serve them best. So, but don't have the 6-year-old syndrome of I can't see it, so it can't see me. Water will find a way, so get them to be plumbers.
Fascinating. And you said earlier in the conversation that when you're having your AI amnesty, you go for a walk. And I think no matter what we're dealing with our kids, is just to make sure none of these technologies is omnipresent, that there are breaks in nature, that there are walks, there's physical activity. You agree with that?
100%. I'm seeing that my son loves soccer. He loves Lego. My daughter loves piano. And I think even when Suno first came out for AI music, my daughter was like, this is amazing. I can create songs, and then you see like, oh, this is just not fun anymore.
Yes. Right. It's a crutch.
And even me, the more I talk about AI, the more I feel like I want to talk to humans about other things and be with communities. So I do think we have a deep natural desire to be a part of a community. And I think AI can profoundly shape society for the good. And I'm optimistic about this. But equally, we can't forget our history in terms of what we grew up in, and how we've evolved as humans, and our core need.
Fantastic. Well, you said earlier, Marc, people can ask me questions or learn. In the time we have left, what's the best way for people to continue to learn from you after this podcast? Are there social media? Is there a website they could go to, books to read? How can people learn more from you after they've listened to this?
Yes, yeah. Well, thanks for the invitation. So the best way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Most of my writing is there on LinkedIn. As you know, I'm a fellow at the business school, so we always have wonderful courses at Cambridge that people want to come to learn about AI. And I am starting to write a book.
All right.
So watch this space.
Fantastic. Well, Marc, this was a true pleasure for me. I always learn when I listen to you, and I'm going to grab my notes when I play this back so I can get on 11 Labs and all these other things. And you might not even recognize me the next time we talk, because I will have learned so much. I know you're extremely busy, so thank you so much for your time, your energy, your enthusiasm, and sharing your wisdom with all of us.
My pleasure. All the very best to you, and all the best to the listeners as well. Thanks for having me, Bill.
Take care. For those of you trying to raise kids in this new world of AI, Marc offers the sage advice of not completely shielding them from these technologies, but making sure they learn how to use them and also continue to learn how to learn on their own and without the aid of technology tools. And I'll repeat something he said earlier, that we should use AI to make us more human, not less. And I'd add that AI amnesty walk, as he calls them, will be a valuable tool in that effort. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Dr. Marc Bloomfield. Before you go, it would help us out a lot if you'd leave us a rating or review. And consider subscribing to the Blue Sky podcast and following the Optimism Institute on social media to be sure you never miss a future episode. My thanks go to Crush Graphics, who's responsible for graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute. That's Crush with a K, if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. And to Sound On, Sound Off, the team behind the incredible editing and mixing of our Blue Sky episodes. can learn more about them at soundonsoundoff.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.